What's up, guys? Ben here at Tactical Nutrition, where we are cutting through the matrix, cutting through the propaganda, finding out the true way to be the fittest version of yourself. We talk about mental strength, we talk about physical strength, we talk about spiritual strength, we talk about nutrition, we talk about different workout strategies, all types of stuff. Everything's open here. I actually first wanted to call this, I started a channel called The Health Matrix, and I still might start up again because I wanted something where I could talk about more topics. Like, I don't like to just sit here and ramble about nutrition, even though it's my passion and I'm good at it, and people need to know. There's a lot of health news and there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the world, and just like, I wanted to have something that encompassed everything. So I might still start that channel up. We'll see here. But in this video, this is more useful, practical advice about what kind of cardio should I do to lose weight. And this has been a question, this is an age-old question, meaning that I heard about it when I was in college 20 years ago, and when we were learning about it in exercise physiology classes and things like that. And the mistakes still abound to this day. There's so much information available, guys. You gotta go out there and you gotta learn some stuff. You don't have to learn everything, but I've said this in other videos, you will save yourself a lot of time. Years and years and years of frustration. You could compound 3 years of results into 3 months sometimes if you just find the right pieces to the puzzle. So I'm talking about cardio here. There's kind of like two types of cardio, right? Steady state cardio and then high intensity training, I guess, cardio. There's all types of different things. There's interval training, there's Tabata workouts, there's all types of stuff. And here's what I'm going to say. Both of these forms of cardio, in terms of steady state and high intensity cardio training, they both have their uses. So steady state cardio is where you're on the treadmill. Low intensity is steady state, right? Walking on the treadmill, getting on the Stairmaster, on the elliptical, whatever it is, going for a walk outside, which is what I would advise people to do. At least then you're out in nature. I don't know how people in the middle of summer can get on a treadmill, but I digress. Maybe because it's so hot outside, but whatever. Anyway, steady state cardio, the definition of it from like a scientific standpoint is sometime where you keep your heart rate elevated above, let's say, 120 or so for 30 minutes. That was what we learned in school. That was like the NSCA definition, the National Strength Conditioning Association definition. It's probably changed, but that's kind of like essentially like a broad brush definition. It's at least 30 minutes long, and you keep your heart rate elevated above a certain percentage. I want to say it's about like above like 60% of your max heart rate. So for instance, like a lot of people's max heart rate could be like 200, which is like, you rarely want to ever get that high, but that would be like your absolute max heart rate if you were ever, and that's if you're younger. It goes down as you're older. So you keep the heart rate lower. This makes sense, right? And you can find these graphs online. If you really want to know these numbers, just go to Google. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I don't really care. I don't use this kind of information when I'm training my clients in person. After a while, I've taken so many heart rates. I was an intern at a fire department where they taught me how to take pulses, EMTs, and they don't take a 30-second pulse. They take, like, the guys like that. We don't have 30 seconds if we're dealing with an emergency. I take a 5-second pulse. You should be able to estimate what your heart rate is to within 10, 15 beats per minute. Okay, you're not Lance Armstrong. You don't need to be within 2 to 3 beats per minute like this with this Ivan Drago types of training, okay? Anyway, I digress. So steady state cardio. Now, what it does is the whole allure of steady state cardio is that it does utilize more fat for fuel percentage wise. Now, this is where the percentages and the actual calories differ. And this is a huge part of why you should do more high intensity training, in my opinion. So let's say, when you're at rest or when you're doing a low intensity activity, let's say you're walking, your body does not need to utilize carbohydrates as fat because carbohydrates and sugar are generally more quick fuel for high intensity exercise. Like when you're doing if you're doing like a set of back squats and your heart rate's getting up high, your body's quickly utilizing more sugar, glucose, because it's a quicker fuel. Fat is a more economical fuel. So technically, when you're sleeping, you're burning fat. See, this is what happens when they say it's a fat burning workout when you get on the treadmill. You're burning a higher percentage of fat and lower percentage of carbohydrate, depending on your hormonal balance, like that video I just made about insulin. That does have a bit to do with it. But here's the rub. The total number of calories, the total amount of fat is still very low. Again, when you sleep, you're burning more fat because your body is not moving at all, but it still needs fuel. Your body's always using fuel for the organs, and your heart needs to run, your brain needs to run. This requires fuel, ketone bodies from the fat, and you're barely using any carbs. But you're obviously not burning a lot of calories when you're sleeping, right? So you're not burning a lot of calories when you're walking on the treadmill either. Even if you break a sweat after a while, just breaking a sweat doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, although it's a good sign for the most part. So what happens when you do high intensity training? Let's say you get the heart rate up to 150 beats per minute. In my case, I do jump rope for 15 minutes again. I use a weighted weight vest now. I don't get all 15 minutes with the 30-pound vest. It's very difficult, but I break it down into more or less like rounds of 3 minutes with a little bit of rest in between. But my heart rate's pumping up. And what happens is you burn a lot more carbohydrate. True. Your percentage of fat goes down, but you're burning more fat. You're burning more fat, just not as high of a percentage of fat, right? And let's be honest, it's also a lot harder. This is why circuit training, when I worked more in person with my personal training clients, we would do a lot of circuits with active rest, and I'd keep an eye on their heart rate, and we would never let that heart rate drop too low. We'd drop back to 120, and you're back into the set. And so if you think about it, you're actually getting two birds with one stone with that type of a workout. By moving more and resting less, you're technically going to be hitting the NSCA guideline anyway. So a lot of times when I do a workout, like the workout I did this morning, 60 pull-ups, 120 push-ups after the jump rope, and I was just moving back and forth and back and forth. My heart rate wasn't really dropping below 120. And it took about a half hour to do this whole thing. So I technically had my heart rate above 120 for 30 minutes. So technically I had a steady state cardio session, but my heart rate was also spiking. Now what happens when your heart rate spikes, and I talked about this in the insulin video, which is the video before this. And what happens is you get metabolic responses. You get that afterburn effect that I was talking about, where after you leave the workout, your metabolism remains increased. That's the main part of the high intensity training. Your metabolism remains increased, so you're burning more calories throughout the day, right? So if you can burn an extra 200 calories, and you don't need to don't worry too much about this type of calorie stuff. It's more about how are you looking, how are you feeling. You're not going to know if you burned 150 calories unless you go get tested of some sort. But so you raise the metabolism, and your body is using more fat for fuel over time, right? Because after the workout, you leave and your body is still afterburning. It's burning more fat for fuel. There's a lot more physiological stuff in here, but just give it a whirl, right? you got to find what works for you. Now, when bodybuilders are training I understand they do a lot of steady state cardio. When I trained a fitness competitor about 12 years ago, she got second place, by the way, and not out of like 3 people. It was out of like 12. But she was doing basically working out 3 times a day because she was doing steady state cardio in the morning, and this was coming up to the competition, coming down at crunch time. Steady state in the morning, her weight training workout in the middle of the day, steady state at night, and she had a full-time job. So she really made it work. But what I'm saying is, like, once you're like at that really, really lean level already, like a fitness competitor, you're starting to get down into those almost unnatural body fats. Steady state cardio can be very useful, right? So it's like, because I mean, like you're just kind of trying to burn off that last little bit of fat. Now, for the average person, if you're like 80 pounds overweight, it may seem like, well, isn't that what I want to do? Yes and no. Because while steady state cardio can be good for building, it builds what I've heard called, and I'll end the video on this, the metabolic machine, the aerobic machine. I think that was Jim Wendler that coined that. That's why, like, he said people should, you should do weight training, but you also don't want to be gym bro. Gym bro that comes in, weight trains, takes huge long rest periods, never gets the heart rate all that high, and then like doesn't have any cardio at all. Because what happens is you do build up with the steady state cardio, again, which can be done during the weightlifting workout if you do active rest, jump rope in between sets, jumping jacks, squats, anything like that. You can get it done in the weight training workout. You don't have to do the steady state cardio. But you build up an aerobic machine, your body, the cells will actually create more mitochondria, which are going to help oxidize, which is oxidative stress, which is basically cardio. And so your body will create more. It essentially like gives your body the ability to burn fat easier, if that makes sense. It's an aerobic machine. It also allows you to be able to get through the workouts easier so that you can be more intense. Because like, again, when I'm doing my interval training, and I mean, like, I'm just saying like a set of squats and then jump rope for active rest, which you'll actually recover better after a while, which seems weird. Like you think sitting down would be better, but that's for another video. I'll talk about active rest then. That's a good idea for another video. But you'll give yourself a better work capacity, obviously, because when you do cardio, and like this is a good point of like steady state cardio. I'm talking about just gym workouts here too. I'm not talking about if you like to cycle and things like that. Obviously, if you're like a cyclist, this shit goes out the window. You're predominantly a steady state cardio with interval training when you're doing your sprints and whatnot. But what'll happen is like your heart rate will drop back down quicker. So that's very useful when you're weight training, because you do your hard set of bench press or your push-ups, your pull-ups, or whatever it might be, deadlifts. If you're doing a hard set of pull-ups or deadlifts or something like that, or just, I'm thinking like deadlifts or squats or bench, like your heart rate will get up there. Unless you're doing like strictly strength workout where you're doing like 3 reps. Your heart rate will get up there. And so what happens is your heart rate drops down quicker, which allows you to get back into the work sooner. And it's just good for heart health too. Steady state cardio is good for heart health. But for fat loss, you're better off integrating weight training with your cardio, as in doing the active rest in between each set, or if anything else, doing your weight training workout first. A nice hardcore weight training workout, not like just, like we've talked about, not just this like tricep press downs and curls and that's your workout though. Actual weight training workout. Then you end the workout with the steady state cardio, if you're going to do it that way. Don't do it the other way around. See a lot of people that get on the treadmill. I learned this in college. I would squat and I would jog on the treadmill for 30 minutes, which I hated more than anything in the world, and then I would go squat. And I noticed immediately my squat would go down. Whereas if I just did like a quick 5-minute warm up and then with the squat, wow, my squat is a lot stronger because you don't turn the warm up on the treadmill. Don't turn a warm up on a treadmill into your workout. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, guys, I think I could have done this a little better. I'll have to go more into this in the future, but it's just the idea, just a little bit to help you guys out again, to reach your fitness goals. High intensity interval training. I'll see you guys in the next video. That's all I got for you. Peace out.